Govan, good morning to you. The reaction and some critics, as far as social media is concerned, Govan, will say the inaction by government, but at least we're hearing from Fikile Mbalula, but he's one part of a very big chain of command.
Yeah, indeed, but Fikile Mbalula confirming in that interview as well that they will be making a presentation to the special cabinet meeting this morning in terms of how ready South Africa's public transport system is for disinfecting and widespread testing for the COVID-19 virus. But it's interesting here that the president hasn't moved as swiftly as the leaders of other countries on the African continent as well. In Rwanda, we saw an example where a country without any confirmed cases has gone through great lengths to make sure that they don't incur mass infections of the coronavirus. And just next door, Namibia has cancelled their Independence Day celebrations and also blocked travel from certain countries after they have 2 confirmed cases. But we are expecting some serious action from the cabinet after this meeting, especially with regards to travel to and from certain countries. Not clear at this stage whether or not he would mention specific countries and what they would be doing in terms of mass disinfectant campaigns as well as testing.
Well, this is where the problem's going to come in. We're all talking about what's happening in Namibia, Rwanda, the rest of the African countries, but there's a large part of the population, Govan, which relies solely on public transport. Many people don't have the luxury of climbing into their own vehicle, and with that into account, and also the situation of informal settlements, children going to schools that aren't necessarily well maintained. These are the kind of issues governments are going to have to deal with, all the way from transport, all the way to where people are converging.
Yeah, there are a few serious limitations on the government's current messaging of keeping regular washing of hands as well as maintaining social distance, particularly for the more underprivileged and class of society which doesn't have access to clean water all the time or can't afford to practice social distancing of at least 1 meter space between people because of congested spaces such as public transport. That's the kind of response we're looking for today to hear from the president. And we know that the economic cluster of the president is preparing to respond to the perceived or anticipated economic impact of the virus and a lockdown if that is announced, or the travel restrictions. But in terms of how South Africans would continue on a daily basis operating through this mass public transport system and what it would mean for social gatherings, that's the announcement we're expecting from the president. On the private sector side, in terms of corporates and some of the NGOs and religious sectors, we've seen this morning Archbishop Thabo Makgoba saying that he believes that people, when they're receiving the communion in church, should only receive the consecrated bread and not get any wine, reserve that for the priests to try and minimize the impact or the spread of the virus. He's also said that he's called for hand sanitizers to be available at all churches around the country in the absence of a lack thereof. So we're seeing some organization in the private sector. We're expecting the big announcement now from the president in the public sector. And
I'm glad you mentioned the private sector as well as the religious sector as well. Private sector is going to become a bit of a problem. There are large corporations with thousands, if not more, employees often working in the same building as well. They're going to be very interested in what government says they should be doing. The problem with the private sector is they don't necessarily have to follow the government guidelines on this. They would have their own issues to deal with, won't they?
Yeah, well, they're constrained by the rule of law, particularly the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And as it stands currently, the employees are entitled to 14 days of quarantine, but that would be deducted from your sick leave if that is a voluntary quarantine. So in the case of the people that are currently being held at a lodge in Polokwane, that is a compulsory quarantine, and therefore it wouldn't be deducted from your sick leave. Look, unions such as SAPAO have called for workplaces and employers to be a little bit more flexible considering what's happening and to allow the employees to work from home. But we know that there is an impact to the bottom line here. And tomorrow we'll see the ministers of trade and industry as well as labor presenting to the National Economic Development and Labor Council, NEDLANC, on the possible impact and how far employers can go in terms of advising their employees to stay stay at home, work from home if possible, or come into work and manage exactly how that happens. Sapao also saying that if you find one of your employees getting sick, it's better to isolate them in the office if you insist that they should be at the workplace. But the advice really here is allow people to work from home. Of course, the impact on the bottom line for South Africa's growth as well is expected to be clarified by the Cabinet, at least after they have this meeting.
Yeah, we're heading into uncharted waters. Govan Whittles, thank you very much. More from that briefing later here on ENCA.